Super Slam is the next mainline Flesh and Blood set, releasing on September 26th. It's a wrestling themed set with just 2 classes, Brute and Guardian, but it comes with a whopping 31 card expansion slot, promising not only newly designed cards, but multiple reprints. And so today I want to go over some of the cards that I think would make for some super slam dunk reprints in that expansion slot. I'm going to order these from what I think are the least to most likely to show up as reprints, but obviously I don't think all of them will get reprinted at the same time. I just want to go over cards that I think need reprints and could show up here. Of course, there are a lot of cards that could be reprinted and I can't mention all of them here, so make sure that you leave a comment on what cards you think should be included, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button while you're down there. But with that all said, let's take a quick look at an honorable mention. Out of all of the big bomb majestic attacks that exist in this game, none are quite as devastating as Felling of the Crown. This earth attack has been ravaging players' hands ever since its release in Rosetta, forcing them to tuck a card on attack. Everything about this card is just amazing. It decomposes, rips a card from everyone's hand, and if you have 4 Earth and Banish, it swings for a whopping 8 for just 3 resources. I can't tell you how many times I've been able to block with 2 cards, then just throw this at my opponent and watch the light die from their eyes as they realize that no matter what they do, their next turn will not be as good as they had hoped. And the price of this card really highlights the power, because even though the 3 heroes that can run it aren't even at the top of the meta, it's still a $65 card. However, the reason that it's an honorable mention instead of being on the list is both because it's only played in 3 heroes and because Rosetta wasn't that long ago, releasing only a year and 6 days before Super Slam's release. So while I would love to see a Felling reprint, I'm not sure we'll get one, at least not until a new Earth hero is coming into the game. And so for now, let's get to the cards that I feel more confident on. So you know how I just said that Rosetta was likely too soon for reprints? Well, the first card on this list is skirting that line because The Weakest Link released in part the Mistveil just 1 set before Rosetta. However, I do think there's a higher chance that this card will get a reprint for a few reasons. 1, this card does target Gravy Bones, who is one of, if not the best deck right now. 2, this card is a generic, meaning that every hero can play it and not just 3 like Felling of the Crown. And 3, it's $55 freaking dollars. Even though Part the Mistveil is just a few months older than Rosetta, I can see it being open for reprint, especially because all 3 heroes from it hit Living Legend, meaning that even if some stores still have boxes, no one's going to open them. And The Weakest Link, while not as ubiquitous as Command & Conquer, is still a very powerful anti-meta card that will continue to see play in decks. And without a reprint, the card will only climb higher, especially if we see more non-blocks like the charms that have been spoiled in Super Slam. However, there's a very real chance that Super Slam doesn't really have many more non-blocks, and The Weakest Link is younger than other cards on this list, so it could be left out here and see a reprint in the future instead. And because of that, I've got it here at number 5. Way earlier this year, I did a video called We Need to Talk About Flesh and Blood Prices, and in it I identified 4 staple Majestics that were much more expensive than everything else: Command & Conquer, Enlightened Strike, Codex of Frailty, and Warmongers Diplomacy. Since then, we've had a minorly impactful reprint of CNC and a very successful reprint of Codex, and also added 2 new cards to the list with Shelter from the Storm and the aforementioned Weakest Link. Now, while I already put Weakest Link on the list, and Shelter was released way too recently, I think that Warmongers Diplomacy is a perfect choice for a reprint in Super Slam. And this is because, despite the fact that it's not a super necessary card in this current meta, it's still $70 and has absolutely no reason being so. Listen, I've been a huge advocate my entire time playing this game that cards need value in order for the entire ecosystem of this game to work, and I'm not going to go on a tangent about it here. But Warmongers, this thing is literally just a titanium bauble like 90+% of the time you play it, but has a huge impact in the other 10%. However, because of those 10% of matchups, for example Viserai when he was a super powerful deck after Rosetta, you need to run it when the meta calls for it. And when that happens, Warmongers usually goes upwards of $100, which is just brutal. And so even though it doesn't look like it'll be completely necessary to run in the upcoming meta, between the obnoxious price and considering LSS have been reprinting staple Majestics in the expansion slot already, I do think there's a very real possibility we could finally see a Warmongers reprint. Coming in at number 3, I've got Balance of Justice. Yep, that's right, I have put a legendary on this list, although I know what you might be thinking. Wait, let me get this straight. You actually think they're going to reprint a legendary? What are you, stupid? Hey, My mommy said I'm smart. Anyways, in this instance, there's actually historical precedence for Balance of Justice being reprinted here. See, we've had two other generic legendary helms similar to it in the game, Arcanite Skullcap and Crown of Providence. Skullcap released in Arcane Rising, but was reprinted as the Dull Cap in Everfest. Crown of Providence was similar, originally releasing in Uprising and then as the non-foil Crown of Poverty in Dusk Till Dawn. One thing you might notice about both these cards is that they were released in main sets, then were reprinted in supplemental sets. And while sure, Super Slam is a draftable set, let's be honest. With the wrestling gimmick and a 31 card expansion slot, Super Slam definitely feels like a new rendition of the older supplemental sets. And reprinting Balance of Justice after High Seas would also make sense, as all the pirate heroes love to draw cards from the gold, especially Gravy Bones. And I don't know if anyone's noticed, but Gravy Bones is somewhat popular, and so naturally the demand for Balance has increased, giving it a hefty $140 price tag for the Rainbow Foil. On top of all that, Balance of Justice came out in Heavy Hitters, which is the set that Super Slam is based off of. So if LSS wants to reprint Balance in a similar way to Skullcap and the Crown of Providence, then I can't think of a better place to do it than the upcoming set. If you've been paying any attention to this video instead of just half listening to it in the background while doing something else, you might remember me mentioning that there were a couple other staple Majestics alongside Warmongers Diplomacy that needed reprints. And after we've seen CNC and Codex, I think that Enlightened Strike is primed to be reprinted. As a legendary with new art, yes, but reprinted nonetheless. This card is currently sitting around $40, and so it's actually the cheapest out of the big staple Majestics, but I still think that it's on the table. See, I like to build a lot of decks, and I'm sure a lot of you do too. And while I do have a playset of all of these staple cards, once they're in a deck, I don't like to swap them around. Now, for cards like Shelter and CNC, this is fine because they're not really cards that make the deck function. They're just powerful defensive and offensive cards, and I can find substitutes. E-Strike, however, is one of those cards that I actually do want to play in multiple decks. For example, I run my Rainbow Foil copies in my Florian deck, but I also want them for Ira. And it's not just those heroes. Right now, Verdance uses it, as well as every Guardian under the sun, in order to clear board states. And in the past, heroes like Enigma, Dromai, Briar, and Aurora used it as well. I really think that E-Strike is just one of those cards that, due to its flexibility, is really important for new players to get their hands on. Even if it's not a card you'll run in a final tuned build of a deck, it's a really good card to use as upgrades for things like the Armory decks, with the only exceptions really being the Mechanologist ones. So even though E-Strike isn't as expensive as a card like Warmongers, I think it's one of those cards that's more important for players to have. Warmongers or even CNC are powerful disruption tools, but there are other disruption cards. But E-Strike just doesn't quite have a total replacement, as you can only ever do one of the three abilities with a cheaper card. And because of that, as well as the fact that the game has grown a lot over the past year and a half, I can definitely see this card getting upshifted in Super Slam's expansion slot. Number one on my list is a card that I almost didn't even include at all. Because Super Slam is a Brute and Guardian set, I didn't want to include their class cards since I figured they would just be reprinted in the main set instead, except for one card that I think will desperately need a reprint: Savage Sash. This chess piece is played by every Brute because, well, I mean, the card is actually kind of busted. Like, why is it every 6 power and not just Brute cards? But the problem with it isn't even the $40 to $50 price tag. It's that it only comes in the KO Armory deck, which had a very tight print run. And I guess it was also printed as a Judge promo, but like, that obviously doesn't count. But seriously, this card is already in high demand while Brutes aren't even top of the meta, and LSS have hinted that they're getting absolutely juiced in Super Slam. That means that if everyone flocks to the class, this card will not only shoot up in price even more, but it will also just be impossible to find. Because that's the thing, it's not just about the cost of a card, it's also about whether or not players can even find it. Well, sure, you might be able to see a few copies of the card on TCG Player. I imagine that Savage Sash is likely impossible to find elsewhere in the world, and if the demand for it goes way up, it'll likely dry up the supply completely. This will be awesome for anyone who currently owns a Sash who doesn't need it, but it will make Brutes more inaccessible, which isn't exactly what you want to do when you're trying to drive hype for them in a new set. And let's be real, they can't include this in the main set. Super Slam is draftable, and if you were to pull this card, you'd probably just auto-win every match because it's so stupidly strong. And so that's why I have it here as the number one card that I think will be reprinted in the Super Slam expansion slot. In fact, I feel so confident on this, allow me to add that I don't think it will be upshifted like we've been seeing, and it will instead just be the same art but non-foil. And if I'm wrong, well, you guys can come back to this video and call me an idiot. In fact, the first person to do so will get their comment hearted and pinned. So again, if Savage Sash doesn't get reprinted in Super Slam, then me, Big Dum Dum, and you have full permission to come back and tell me that. As I said in the beginning, I don't think that we'll see all these cards being reprinted at once, but I do hope to see at least a couple of them. LSS have been careful to not completely tank the market, but there is need for some of the cost of this game to come down, which is why I'm thrilled to see that they are doing more than just one. However, that will be all for this video. Do you agree with my choices, or do you think that there are other cards that should be reprinted? Let me know in the comments below. I do read all of them, even if I don't always respond. Anyways, thanks for watching, and thank you to all of the patrons. You Chads are genuinely awesome. Huge shoutouts to the Giga Chads Geeks first, Elixir, Vinny, John, Ty, Chemical, and Dark Memoria. Then we've got the Alpha Chads, Thomas, Zajima, and Approximo, and then there's the Super Chads, Cece, Ben, Yogbadoodles21, Kevin, and Wolf Shadowmancer. Thanks again as always, and stay Chadly, my friends.